The sun hung high in the clear blue sky as Sergeant Tasha Williams drove down Main Street of her hometown, Pinewood. The familiar sights brought back a flood of memories. 2 long years she'd been away, serving her country overseas, and now she was finally back home on leave. Her chest swelled with a mix of pride and excitement. She hadn't told anyone she was coming today, not even her father. Tasha checked her reflection in the rearview mirror and smiled. She was still wearing her military fatigues, having come straight from the airport. Her father, Police Chief Robert Williams, had no idea she was already in town. The surprise on his face would be worth the long journey and the secret she'd kept for weeks. Just a few more minutes, she whispered to herself, tapping her fingers on the steering wheel. The plan was simple: drive straight to the police station and walk into her dad's office unannounced. She could already picture his reaction. Pinewood hadn't changed much. The same coffee shop where she used to study still stood on the corner. The hardware store owned by Mr. Chen still had the same faded blue awning. Yet something felt different. Maybe it was her. 2 years in a war zone changes a person. Tasha slowed down at a yellow light, waiting patiently for it to turn green. Her dark blue sedan with out-of-state plates stood out among the local vehicles. She'd rented it at the airport, wanting to make sure no one recognized her car and spoiled the surprise. As she turned onto Oakwood Avenue, just 3 blocks from the police station, she noticed the police cruiser in her rearview mirror. It had been following her for about half a mile. She didn't think much of it until the flashing lights came on. What did I do? She wondered, genuinely confused. Tasha was sure she hadn't been speeding. She'd been extra careful, stopping completely at every stop sign, using her turn signals properly. But she knew the drill. Her father had taught her years ago what to do if pulled over. Tasha put on her right turn signal and pulled over to the curb smoothly. She turned off the engine, rolled down her window, and placed both hands visibly on the steering wheel, just as her father had instructed countless times during her teenage years. Through her side mirror, she watched as Officer Paul Reynolds stepped out of his patrol car. She didn't recognize him. He must be new to the force. Tall and stiff-backed, he approached with one hand already resting on his holster. Something about his walk, his posture, made her stomach tighten. "Driver's license and registration," he demanded before he'd even reached her window. His tone was harsh, nothing like the friendly community policing her father had always encouraged in the department. "Good afternoon, officer," Tasha replied calmly. "May I ask why I'm being pulled over?" Officer Reynolds' eyes narrowed as he took in her. Something in his expression changed, hardened. "I said license and registration now." "Of course. My registration is in the glove compartment and my wallet is in my back pocket. I'm going to reach for them now, okay?" Tasha explained each movement before making it, just as soldiers were taught to do in tense situations. "Step out of the vehicle," Reynolds suddenly ordered, his right hand now gripping his holster. Tasha blinked in surprise. "Sir, I don't understand what—" "I said step out of the vehicle now." His voice rose sharply. Confused but not wanting to escalate the situation, Tasha slowly opened her door and stepped out, her hands clearly visible. "Officer, I'm Sergeant Tasha Williams, U.S. Army. I just got back from overseas deployment." "Whatever. The problem is—" "Hands on your head, turn around," Reynolds shouted, and to Tasha's shock he drew his weapon, pointing it directly at her. The busy street seemed to slow down around them. A young woman walking her dog stopped in her tracks. An elderly man getting out of his parked car froze with his door half open. A teenager on a bicycle skidded to a halt, his eyes wide. "Officer, there's clearly some misunderstanding." Tasha tried again, her heart pounding but her voice steady. Years of training had taught her how to remain calm under pressure. She slowly raised her hands and placed them on her head. "On your knees, now," Reynolds barked, taking a step closer, his gun still pointed at her chest. The absurdity of the situation struck Tasha as she carefully knelt down on the hot pavement. Here she was, in her military uniform, being treated like a dangerous criminal, just blocks from where her father worked as the chief of police. But she also knew the reality many people faced. The reality her father had warned her about since she was a little girl. "I'm complying, officer," she said clearly, loudly enough. for the gathering onlookers to hear. I'm a U.S. Army sergeant. My father is Police Chief Williams. There's been a mistake. Reynolds didn't lower his weapon. Stop talking and put your hands behind your head. Tasha followed the instruction, the rough pavement digging into her knees, through her uniform pants. The sun beat down on her back. Sweat began to form on her forehead, not from the heat but from the stress of having a gun pointed at her. A small crowd had gathered now. Someone was recording with their phone. An older woman was on her own phone talking urgently to someone. Tasha wondered if she should be scared, but mostly she felt angry. Angry that this was happening in her hometown. Angry that her uniform meant nothing to this officer. Angry that the lessons her father had taught her about respecting both the badge and the community seemed lost on Reynolds. My ID is in my back pocket, Tasha said. It clearly shows who I am. Please just check it. I didn't give you permission to speak, Reynolds snapped, taking another step forward. A car slowed down beside them. The window rolled down, and an older man called out, "What's going on here? Why are you pointing a gun at a soldier?" "Move along, sir. Police business," Reynolds replied without turning his head. But the man didn't move. More cars were stopping now. More phones recording. The situation was growing more tense by the second, and Tasha wondered how it had escalated so quickly from a routine traffic stop to this public spectacle. What should have been one of the happiest days of her life, surprising her father after 2 years away, had turned into something she never could have imagined. And as she knelt there on the hot pavement, she had no idea that just a few blocks away her father was about to receive a call that would bring these two worlds crashing together. The growing crowd of onlookers made Officer Reynolds nervous. Tasha could see it in the way his eyes darted around, in how his grip tightened on his weapon. The situation was getting out of hand, and she knew it. 20 feet away, a mother hurried her young son across the street, away from the scene. An older couple stood on the sidewalk, the woman's hand covering her mouth in shock. At least 3 people had their phones out, recording everything. "Officer, please," Tasha said, her voice calm despite her racing heart. "Check my military ID. Call the station. Ask for Chief Williams. He'll confirm who I am." "I told you to be quiet," Reynolds shouted, his face flushed with anger that seemed way bigger than the situation called for. "You think that uniform means you can talk back? You think it gives you special rights?" Tasha bit her lip. She knew better than to argue with an agitated officer pointing a gun at her. Her father had taught her that lesson well. Stay calm, follow instructions, live to sort it out later. Those were his words. So she stayed silent, even as the hot pavement burned through her uniform pants, even as her knees ached from the rough surface. Mrs. Patterson, who had taught at Pinewood High for 30 years before retiring, pushed her way to the front of the growing crowd. "Officer Reynolds, what on earth are you doing?" she called out. "That's Chief Williams' daughter." "It most certainly does concern me," Mrs. Patterson replied, already dialing a number on her phone. "I've known Tasha since she was in pigtails. I'm calling the station right now." Reynolds reached for his radio. "Dispatch, this is Officer Reynolds. I need backup at the corner of Oakwood and Elm. Got an uncooperative subject, possible false military impersonation." Tasha almost laughed at the absurdity of it all. False military impersonation? She'd spent the last 2 years in actual combat zones, earned medals that were currently packed in her duffel bag in the trunk, and now she was being accused of pretending to be a soldier. "My military ID is in my back pocket," she repeated. "Just check it, please." I said, "Shut up." Reynolds took a step closer, his weapon still aimed at her chest. The sound of another police siren in the distance cut through the tension. Reynolds seemed to relax slightly at the thought of backup arriving. Tasha hoped whoever was coming would have more sense than this guy. A minute later, another patrol car pulled up behind Reynolds's vehicle. Officer Lisa Chen stepped out, her hand resting lightly on her holster but her weapon still securely fastened. She took in the scene quickly, Tasha kneeling on the ground in military fatigues, Reynolds with his gun drawn, the gathering crowd. "Reynolds, what's going on here?" Chen asked, approaching cautiously. "Got a suspicious driver out of state plates claiming to be military. Been uncooperative and mouthy. Reynolds replied without taking his eyes off Tasha. Chen looked at Tasha more carefully, taking in her uniform, her composed demeanor despite the gun pointed at her. Unlike Reynolds, who had only been with the Pinewood Police Department for 4 months, Chen had been around for 5 years. Her eyes widened slightly with recognition. "Reynolds, holster your weapon," Chen said quietly. "What? No way. We don't know who she is or what she's capable of," Reynolds protested. "I said holster your weapon, officer," Chen repeated, more firmly this time. "That's an order." Reynolds hesitated, then slowly lowered his gun, though he didn't put it away completely. Chen approached Tasha carefully. "Ma'am, I'm Officer Chen. Can you identify yourself, please?" "Sergeant Tasha Williams, U.S. Army, 75th Ranger Regiment. Just returned stateside yesterday. I'm Chief Williams's daughter," Tasha replied clearly. "My ID is in my back right pocket." Chen nodded. "May I retrieve your ID, Sergeant Williams?" "Yes, ma'am." Chen carefully reached into Tasha's pocket and pulled out her wallet, flipping it open to check her military ID and driver's license. Her expression shifted as she confirmed what she already suspected. "You can lower your hands and stand up, Sergeant," Chen said, offering her hand to help Tasha up from the pavement. "Reynolds, a word, now." Reynolds finally holstered his weapon, his face a mix of confusion and defiance. "What's the problem? She was driving erratically and gave me attitude when I pulled her over." "The problem," Chen said in a low voice, as she pulled him aside, "is that you just held the police chief's daughter at gunpoint for no apparent reason." "She's a decorated soldier, Reynolds." The color drained from Reynolds's face. "How was I supposed to know that? Maybe by checking her ID before pulling your weapon? Maybe by not escalating a routine traffic stop into whatever this is?" Chen gestured at the scene around them. The crowd that had now grown to at least 20 people, most with phones recording, Mrs. Patterson still on her call with someone at the station, Tasha brushing the dirt off her uniform pants. "She was disrespectful," Reynolds insisted, but his voice had lost its earlier confidence. "I heard the whole thing on my approach," Chen replied. "She was perfectly respectful. You were the one shouting." Before Reynolds could respond, his radio crackled to life. "All units be advised, Chief Williams is en route to Oakwood and Elm. ETA 2 minutes." The crowd, which had heard the radio call, began to murmur with anticipation. Mrs. Patterson smiled knowingly as she put her phone away. Tasha closed her eyes briefly. This was not how she had planned to reunite with her father after 2 years apart. "You might want to start thinking about how you're going to explain this to the chief," Chen said to Reynolds, not bothering to hide the note of satisfaction in her voice. "Because here he comes now." A police SUV turned the corner, lights flashing but no siren. It pulled up sharply to the curb and Chief Robert Williams stepped out. Even in his hurry, he moved with authority, his tall frame commanding attention from everyone present. His eyes scanned the scene until they landed on his daughter. For a moment, neither of them moved. 2 years of missed birthdays, holidays, and everyday moments hung in the space between them. Then, Tasha took a step forward, and everything else, Officer Reynolds, the crowd, the whole situation, seemed to fade away. Chief Williams stood perfectly still, his eyes fixed on his daughter. The crowd fell silent, sensing the weight of the moment. For 2 years he had lived with the constant worry that all military parents know. The late-night fears, the way his heart jumped whenever the phone rang at odd hours, the relief of each video call showing her face, tired but alive. And now here she was, standing in the middle of the street in her fatigues, her hands slightly dirty from the pavement where she had been forced to kneel. The surprise homecoming she had planned had turned into this public spectacle. "Tasha," he said finally, his deep voice carrying across the quiet street. That one word contained everything: relief, joy, confusion, and a rising anger as he took in the scene around her. "Hi, Dad," Tasha replied with a small smile. "This isn't exactly how I planned to surprise you." In 3 long strides, Chief Williams crossed the distance between them and wrapped his arms around his daughter. The crowd broke into spontaneous applause. For a moment, father and daughter held each other tightly, making up for 2 years of missed embraces. Then, reluctantly, the chief stepped back, his face shifting from that of a relieved father to the stern professional everyone in Pinewood knew. "Officer Chen," he said, his voice now clipped and official. "Report." Chen straightened her posture instinctively. "Sir, I arrived on scene to find Officer Reynolds conducting a traffic stop with his weapon drawn. The subject—" She caught herself. "Your daughter was kneeling on the ground. Upon checking her ID, I confirmed her identity as Sergeant Williams." Chief Williams nodded once, his jaw tight. "And the reason for the initial stop?" Before Chen could answer, Reynolds stepped forward. "Sir, I observed the vehicle making an improper lane change. When I approached, the driver was argumentative." Mrs. Patterson couldn't contain herself any longer. "Robert Williams, that is a bald-faced lie, and you know I never stand for lies in my classroom or out of it. I heard the whole thing." This young officer was shouting at Tasha before she could even properly respond. Had his gun out for no good reason. Several other bystanders nodded in agreement. A young man in a delivery uniform spoke up. "I got it all on video, Chief. Been recording since he made her kneel down." Chief Williams surveyed the crowd, noting the number of phones pointed in their direction. This was quickly becoming more than just a family matter or even a departmental issue. In the age of social media, it would be all over town, maybe all over the country by dinner time. "Thank you all for your concern," he addressed the crowd, his voice firm but controlled. "I appreciate you looking out for my daughter and for our community. If anyone has video of this incident, the department would appreciate copies for our internal review. Officer Chen will take your contact information." He turned back to his officers. "Chen, secure the scene and take statements. Reynolds." He paused, visibly restraining himself. "Report to the station immediately. Lieutenant Garcia will take your badge and weapon pending investigation." Reynolds' face paled. "Sir, with all due respect—" "That wasn't a suggestion, officer." The chief cut him off. "And I'd think very carefully about your next words." The warning in his voice was unmistakable. Reynolds' mouth snapped shut. He nodded stiffly, turned on his heel, and walked back to his patrol car. The crowd parted to let him pass, some watching with open hostility, others simply curious about the drama unfolding on their normally quiet street. "Dad," Tasha said quietly, touching her father's arm. "My stuff is still in the rental car." The chief's expression softened slightly. "Let's get your things and head home. Your mother is going to be—" He trailed off, shaking his head with a small smile. "Well, after she stops crying, she's probably going to cook enough food to feed your entire regiment." As they walked to the rental car, several people approached to welcome Tasha home or to shake the chief's hand. News was already spreading through the small town that Sergeant Williams was back, and not just that. She'd been mistreated by one of their own officers. In Pinewood, where community ties ran deep, this was big news. "I'm sorry this happened, Tash," Chief Williams said as they reached her car. "This isn't the welcome home you deserved." Tasha shrugged, popping the trunk to retrieve her duffel bag. "Not your fault, Dad." "It is, though," he replied, taking the heavy bag from her hands. "Reynolds is my responsibility. Every officer in this department is. Their actions reflect my leadership." Tasha looked at her father, noticing the new lines around his eyes, the additional gray at his temples that hadn't been there during their video calls. "You can't control every officer's behavior every minute of the day." "No," he agreed, "but I can set the tone, the expectations, and clearly I've failed somewhere with Reynolds." He paused, looking back at the scene they were leaving behind. Chen taking statements, Mrs. Patterson still holding court with a group of neighbors, the young delivery man showing his phone to another officer who had arrived. "How long have you known him?" Tasha asked as she slid into the passenger seat of her father's SUV, letting him take the wheel. Her own car would be driven to the house by another officer later. "Reynolds?" 4 months. Transferred from a department upstate. Good record, solid. Recommendations. Chief Williams frowned as he started the engine. "At least on paper." Tasha nodded, understanding the implications. Sometimes what looked good on paper hid deeper issues. As a sergeant responsible for the lives of others, She knew how challenging it could be to truly know the people under your command. "What happens now?" she asked as they pulled away from the curb, leaving the commotion behind. Her father's hands tightened on the steering wheel. "Now I have to be both your father and the chief of police, and those two roles want very different things right now." Tasha understood. The father wanted to protect his daughter, maybe even seek some kind of personal revenge against the man who had treated her so poorly. But the chief had responsibilities to the entire department, to the concept of justice itself. "I trust you to do the right thing," she said simply. "You always have." Chief Williams glanced at his daughter, struck by how much she had grown in ways that had nothing to do with physical appearance. The young woman beside him carried herself with a quiet confidence, a steadiness that hadn't been there before her deployment. "When did you get so wise?" he asked with a small smile. "Must have been all those letters you wrote me," Tasha replied, returning his smile. 2 years of dad wisdom delivered straight to the desert. As they turned onto their street, the familiar sight of their 2-story house came into view. Tasha felt a lump form in her throat. After everything that had happened in the last hour, the simple sight of home hit her harder than she expected. What neither of them realized yet was that the incident on Oakwood Avenue was just the beginning. By morning, the story, and the video, would spread far beyond the boundaries of their small town, forcing both father and daughter to confront issues much larger than a single traffic stop gone wrong. The Williams home erupted in joy the moment Tasha walked through the front door. Her mother, Grace, dropped the dish towel she was holding and ran across the room with a cry that was half sob, half laughter. The force of her embrace nearly knocked Tasha off her feet. "My baby. Oh my God, my baby's home." Grace pulled back, just enough to cup Tasha's face in her hands, tears streaming down her cheeks. "Why didn't you tell us? We could have picked you up." "It was supposed to be a surprise," Tasha said, her own eyes filling with tears. "Just not the kind of surprise it turned into." Grace looked questioningly at her husband, noticing his grim expression for the first time. "Robert? What's wrong? What happened?" Chief Williams sighed heavily. "Let's all sit down. Tasha's had a rough welcome home." Over the next 15 minutes, they explained the situation to Grace, whose expressions shifted from confusion to shock to outrage. "He pulled a gun on you? In your uniform? On Oakwood Avenue in broad daylight?" Each question rose in volume until she was nearly shouting. "Mom, I'm okay," Tasha assured her, reaching across the kitchen table to squeeze her mother's hand. "Really? Nothing happened?" "Nothing happened," Grace repeated incredulously. "My daughter had a gun pointed at her by someone who's supposed to protect and serve this community." "That's not nothing, Tasha. Your mother's right," Chief Williams said, his phone buzzing again in his pocket. It had been ringing almost non-stop since they'd arrived home. "And it's definitely not nothing to the rest of the town either." He showed them the screen. 12 missed calls in the last 20 minutes. "The video's already online," he explained. "Dave from the newspaper called. So did Pastor Mike, Mayor Thompson, and half the town council." Tasha winced. "I'm sorry, Dad. This is going to cause problems for you, isn't it?" Chief Williams shook his head firmly. "Don't you dare apologize. You did absolutely nothing wrong. Reynolds is the one who should be sorry, and believe me, by the time I'm done, he will be." "Robert," Grace said, her voice suddenly quiet and serious. "This isn't just about Reynolds, and you know it." The three of them sat in silence for a moment, each understanding the deeper implications. This wasn't just about one bad officer or one traffic stop gone wrong. It was about patterns, systems, and realities that persisted even in a town where the police chief was a black man with 27 years on the force. The ringing of the doorbell broke the silence. Chief Williams checked his watch and stood up. "That'll be Lieutenant Garcia. I asked him to stop by." He returned a minute later with Garcia, a stocky man with salt and pepper hair who had been with the department almost as long as the chief. Garcia's face lit up when he saw Tasha. "Look who's back," he exclaimed, giving her a quick hug. "Though I wish the circumstances were better." "Me too," Tasha agreed with a small smile. Lieutenant Garcia had been a fixture in her life since childhood, a regular at family barbecues and holiday gatherings. "So," Garcia said, his expression turning serious as he sat down at the table, "I took Reynolds' badge and gun. He's on administrative leave pending investigation. But Chief, this thing is blowing up fast. The mayor's called an emergency town council meeting for tomorrow morning. There's already a group planning a protest outside the station at noon." Chief Williams nodded, unsurprised. "What's the mood in the department?" "Split," Garcia admitted. "Most of the veterans are behind you 100%. They know this isn't what we stand for. But Reynolds has a couple of buddies, newer transfers mostly, who are grumbling about railroading and rush to judgment." "Has anyone pulled the dashcam footage yet?" the chief asked. "Working on it now. Should have it within the hour." Grace, who had been quietly listening, suddenly stood up. "I'm making dinner. Tasha needs a proper meal after 2 years of army food, and you all need to eat while you figure this out." Her tone left no room for argument. As Grace busied herself at the stove, Chief Williams lowered his voice. "What did Reynolds say when you took his badge?" Garcia's expression darkened. "Not much to me. But I overheard him in the locker room telling Diaz that it was a setup, that he was being made an example of because of politics." "Politics?" Tasha couldn't help interjecting. "I didn't even know who he was until today." "It's not about you personally," Garcia explained gently. "Some of these guys see any criticism of police conduct as political, especially when race is involved." Chief Williams rubbed his temples, feeling a headache coming on. 27 years I've worked to build trust in this department, to make sure we're serving everyone in this community equally, and still, the doorbell rang again, interrupting his thought. This time it was Mrs. Patterson at the door, along with 3 other residents who had witnessed the incident. "We won't stay long," Mrs. Patterson announced as she marched into the living room. "We just wanted to drop off copies of our statements and check on Tasha." She handed a folder to the chief. "And to let you know we're behind you, Robert. Whatever you need to make this right." The small group stayed only 15 minutes, but by the time they left, 2 more neighbors had arrived with casseroles and words of support. The Williams home phone started ringing along with their cell phones. Even Tasha's old friends from high school were calling and texting once news spread that she was home. "I need to get back to the station," Chief Williams said eventually, standing up reluctantly. "The dashcam footage should be ready, and I want to review it personally before the town council meeting tomorrow." "I'm coming with you," Garcia said. "Immediately." "Me too," Tasha added, rising from her chair. Chief Williams looked at his daughter, about to protest, but something in her expression stopped him. This wasn't just his fight, it was hers too. And after 2 tours of duty in combat zones, she certainly didn't need his protection from a police station. "Okay," he agreed. "But Mom stays here. One Williams in the middle of this circus is enough." Grace looked like she might argue, but then sighed and nodded. "Fine. But you bring our daughter back home in one piece, Robert Williams. She just got here, and I'm not sharing her with the whole town yet." As they drove toward the police station, Tasha stared out the window at the familiar streets of Pinewood. Somewhere along Oakwood Avenue, a small patch of her skin had been scraped raw when she knelt on the pavement. It stung slightly now, a physical reminder of what had happened just hours ago. "You know this isn't going to be simple, right?" her father said quietly from the driver's seat. "Once we get to the station, I'm the chief first, father second. There are procedures that have to be followed, even for something as clear-cut as this." Tasha nodded, understanding. "I know, Dad. Do what you need to do. I just want to make sure this doesn't happen to someone else, someone who doesn't have the police chief for a father." In the back seat, Lieutenant Garcia cleared his throat. "The station's going to be packed. News vans were pulling up when I left." Chief Williams tightened his grip on the steering wheel as they turned the final corner. Sure enough, the small parking lot of the Pinewood Police Department was filled with vehicles, including 2 news vans with satellite dishes on top. A small crowd had already gathered near the entrance. "Ready?" he asked, looking at his daughter. Tasha squared her shoulders just as she did before every mission. "Ready," 6 months later, Tasha stood before a packed community center, her dress uniform crisp and perfectly pressed. The crowd was a mix of police officers, local residents, and reporters. At the front row sat her parents, her mother dabbing at her eyes with a tissue, her father watching with unmistakable pride. "I never planned to become part of a national conversation," Tasha began, her voice steady despite her nerves. "6 months ago, I was just a soldier coming home to surprise my family. What happened next changed not only my life but the lives of many people in this community." The incident on Oakwood Avenue had indeed become much bigger than anyone expected. The video had gone viral within hours, picked up by national news outlets by the next morning. What made the story particularly compelling wasn't just the image of a black woman in military uniform being held at gunpoint during a routine traffic stop. It was the fact that she was the police chief's daughter, and that her father had immediately taken action. "My father taught me from a young age that with authority comes responsibility," Tasha continued. "He showed me that through his actions every day as chief of this department. And when Officer Reynolds abused his authority that day, my father didn't look the other way, even though I was his daughter. Especially because I was his daughter." The investigation had been swift but thorough. The dashcam footage showed clearly that Tasha had made a normal lane change, using her turn signal properly. It also recorded Reynolds' escalation of a routine stop into a dangerous confrontation. But what really turned the tide was what came next when the department under Chief Williams' leadership dug deeper into Reynolds' history. What we discovered in the weeks following the incident was that Officer Reynolds had a pattern of similar behavior at his previous department, Chief Williams had told the town council during a public hearing. 4 complaints of excessive force, all involving people of color, all quietly buried without proper investigation. Reynolds' previous chief had given him a glowing recommendation to get rid of a problem officer without having to fire him, a practice so common it had a nickname in law enforcement circles: passing the trash. Today, I'm proud to stand here as we launched the Pinewood Police Transparency Initiative, Tasha said, gesturing to the banner behind her. This program will ensure that every officer's conduct record follows them throughout their career, with no possibility of hiding or erasing complaints. The initiative had been her idea originally, born during the long nights of discussion with her father as they worked through what had happened and what it meant. Chief Williams had expanded it, bringing in community oversight and independent review processes. "But this isn't just about policing," Tasha added. "It's about how we see each other. It's about breaking down the assumptions we make based on skin color or appearance." In the months since the incident, Tasha had extended her leave from the Army to work with local youth groups and community organizations. The experience she'd gained in the military, leadership, crisis management, working with diverse teams, had proven surprisingly valuable in community organizing. "I went into the military to serve my country," she said. "Now I've found a new way to serve right here at home." As she finished her speech, the applause was thunderous. Chief Williams was the first to stand, followed quickly by the entire room. Tasha felt a lump in her throat as she looked out at the crowd, seeing Officer Chen, who had been promoted to sergeant, Mrs. Patterson, who had become a vocal advocate for police reform, and many of the other witnesses from that day who had since become friends. Reynolds was long gone from Pinewood. After being fired from the force, he had tried to find work at other police departments but found no takers, not with the video still circulating and his complete record now publicly available. Last they'd heard, he had moved to another state and taken a job in private security. But the story wasn't really about Reynolds. It was about what happened after, how a community had come together to demand better, and how a father and daughter had turned a traumatic experience into positive change. After the ceremony, as people mingled and chatted over refreshments, Lieutenant Garcia approached Tasha with a smile. "So, Sergeant Williams, the Army's getting antsy. Your extended leave is almost up. What's next? Going back to your unit or staying here with the old folks?" Tasha sipped her water, considering. The question had been on her mind for weeks now. Her commanding officer had been remarkably understanding about extending her leave, but decisions needed to be made soon. "Actually," she said with a small smile, I've been thinking about applying to the police academy. Garcia's eyebrows shot up. Seriously? After everything that happened? Because of everything that happened, she corrected. Dad's reforms are good, but change comes from within, right? The department needs officers who understand from personal experience why these issues matter. Across the room, her father was deep in conversation with the mayor and several community leaders. He caught her eye and gave a small nod of acknowledgement. They hadn't discussed her plans yet, but somehow she thought he might approve. Well, if you're half the officer your father is, Pinewood would be lucky to have you, Garcia said, giving her shoulder a light punch. Though I'm not calling you Officer Williams, that'll be too confusing with the chief. Tasha laughed, feeling lighter than she had in months. Her homecoming hadn't gone as planned, but maybe it had gone exactly as it needed to. Later that evening, as the Williams family sat around their dinner table, joined by Garcia and his wife, plus Chen and a few other close friends from the department, Tasha found herself looking around at the faces of the people who had supported her through everything. I want to make a toast, she said, raising her glass. Everyone fell silent, turning to look at her expectantly. To second chances, to doing better, and to communities that demand the best from those who serve them. Hear, hear, her father echoed, raising his own glass. As conversations resumed around her, Tasha felt her mother's hand slip into hers under the table. You okay, baby? Grace asked quietly. Tasha nodded, squeezing her mother's hand. Yeah. For the first time in a long time, I think I'm exactly where I'm supposed to be. Outside the window, the sun was setting over Pinewood, casting long shadows across the lawn. The same streets where Tasha had once faced the barrel of a police officer's gun now represented something different to her. Possibility, change, future. The work wasn't finished, not by a long shot. But they had made a start, turned a moment of fear and injustice into a catalyst for something better. Sometimes, Tasha thought as she looked around the table at her family and friends, that's how change happens, not all at once, but person by person, community by community, one difficult moment at a time.